So, Anush, given the historical regional differences, how likely is it that Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and the UAE can collaborate effectively within BRICS?
Putting them into the BRICS basket creates unforeseen tensions and crises. Iran's currency is what you might call junk level. It is almost completely worthless. In theory, de-dollarization makes sense, but then Iran also wants to see a basket of currencies to emerge. China knows that's of great concern to India, but also China being a nuclear weapon state, India being a nuclear weapon state, and Pakistan being a nuclear weapon state, that raises questions about what kind of a BRICS are we creating? Is this now increasingly a pseudo-military organization, or is it still an economic organization?
Hi everyone, my name is Sukanya Saha and you're watching The New Indian. Our today's guest is very special. Mr. Anoush Ehteshami, he's an Iranian economic expert, a professor of international relations in the School of Government and International Affairs at Durham University. He's also been a fellow of the World Economic Forum and served as a member of WEF's foremost body, the Global Agenda Councils from 2010 to 2012, focusing on energy. Hi Anush, welcome to the show.
Hello, Sukanya. Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So, you know that Iran, Ethiopia, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, Iran will be joining the BRICS grouping from January 1st, 2024. So, the group already comprises Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What strategic interests or economic motivations drive Iran's eagerness to join the BRICS group, and how does it align with Iran's broader geopolitical objectives?
That's a very good question. Uh, I think there are a number of factors that affect Iran's decision making. First and foremost, remember, it's the core BRICS. It's the five BRICS countries that invite countries to join it. So it was not Iran's gift to join this, but rather in the gift of the so-called permanent members, if you like, the five countries. So we've got to look at it both from their perspective as much as from Iran's perspective. I think one of the key drivers of this is Iran's desperate need to try and reintegrate in the global economy in some form or another. Because American sanctions, which have now been going on for 40 years or more, in one form or another, have been crippling Iran's economy. Iran's economy is anemic compared to a country of its size, demographically, geographically, geopolitically, and also in terms of its massive mineral resources. So the country should be prospering like Brazil, like South Africa, like South Korea, rather than where it is. So there is this imperative that the country needs to move forward to keep 80 million people prosperous. And it's a hard act when you're under sanctions, when your primary export, which is oil, crude oil, is sanctioned so strongly. So there is that Iran needs to find a way back into the global economy that is not directly controlled by the G7 or the United States. You could argue that the BRICS provides Iran with that opportunity. Secondly, the BRICS positioning as a new interpretation of the international system really chimes with Iran's own, if you like, ideological mantra, that this is a post-Western world order emerging, and that with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization on the one hand, that Iran is now a full member of, which also includes, of course, India and China, and now with the BRICS, Iran can feel that is more directly integrated in this emerging global order, which again is beyond the control of the Americans, but also allows Iran to play a more central, effective role in terms of controlling its own destiny, but also contributing to this emerging global order. The third element is currency. Iran's currency is what you might call junk level. It is almost completely worthless. against major currencies. Why? Again, it goes back to sanctions. It goes back to the weakness of Iran's economy and its inability to bring in foreign direct investment, but also to broaden its exports, trade in general. And while oil is then denominated in US dollars, it means that Iran remains hostage, if you like, to American sanctions. Within the BRICS, if there is talk of creating trade through local currencies, that is a godsend for Iran because it means that it doesn't have to convert its worthless currency into US dollars to do its trading with what are now its major trading partners, China, India, Russia's of this world. So the BRICS, if you like, provides Iran with a whole new economic platform on which to build its trade relations with what it regards to be this emerging pole of the global economy. So for them, to use a Chinese phrase, it's a win-win strategy.
So, how might Iran's participation in BRICS impact its economy, particularly in terms of trade, investment, and access to financial resources within the framework of the BRICS initiatives, like the new development bank?
Right. Uh, I, first of all, I think we need to be a bit cautious about the BRICS and also now about BRICS Plus. I think the BRICS is full of promise, but on deliverables, it hasn't managed it. And there are obvious reasons for this. Russia is under sanctions. India has its own internal priorities to deal with. China is struggling with supply chains. South Africa's economy is not doing very well. And Brazil is continuing to develop, but also Da Silva has to find a new economic strategy beyond the previous administration strategy. So the core BRICS members are all in one way or another vulnerable. And it means that as they look inwards, they're unable to expand the profile of the 5 core members in themselves. And therein lies the problem with the development bank, because it never met its capital objectives. And because it didn't, it was not able then to provide the loans and the facilities for the member countries or beyond to meet their requirements. So it's still an open question, in my view, whether the BRICS Development Bank will be able to assist Iran in ways that Iran would expect it. True, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the new members that come in that you've mentioned, are unlikely to be calling on that kind of facility, but Argentina, Ethiopia, Egypt, these other new members are more than likely to want to turn that development bank to get support. So in a sense, Iran has got competition on its hands, even within this new BRICS Plus. And it has to make a viable economic case to assure preferable access to those finances for development. But you also rightly mentioned direct investment. And that remains a problem, Sukanya, because Iran's economy still remains under sanctions. And because of America's secondary sanctions, companies in the BRICS countries, China is an example of this, have to be very mindful of how they invest in Iran without jeopardizing their markets elsewhere in the West, in particular the United States. Of course, the Chinese-American trade is the biggest in the world. So the Chinese cannot afford to sacrifice that at the altar of Iran. So they all have to balance themselves. So there is a degree of wishful thinking for Iran that somehow all these problems can be solved here. But I think they're more than likely to be facing a whole new set of obstacles and procedures to overcome before they can access the investment or the loans that the BRICS Plus might offer them.
But you mentioned about Argentina. Argentina has refused to join the BRICS grouping. After the recent presidential elections concluded, Javier Milei, who's the new president of Argentina, he said no to BRICS. So Argentina, we all know, is going through an economic turmoil right now. So do you think that was a foolish move by Argentina to say no to BRICS at this stage?
That's a good question. I don't think technically they have said no, I think they've said they're considering their options. So they haven't withdrawn fully. I think actually Argentina would be a hot potato for the BRICS, ready to join. First, one of the BRICS' agendas is to de-dollarize BRICS trade, right? What is the new Argentinian strategy? To use the US dollar as its major national currency. That would create a gaping hole at the heart of the BRICS Plus if they're trying to de-dollarize their trade, right? One. Secondly, the economic strategy of the new Argentinian administration flies in the face of everything that the BRICS are trying to accomplish. And I think it would be a thorn in the side of the BRICS countries, where Argentina, which is a large economy and a pivot of South American political economy, were to join and start making demands and changes that would be uncomfortable, particularly for the Chinese and the Russians, who like to have their economy centrally organized. That runs directly against the ideological orientation of the new Argentinian administration. So having on the sideline will probably be a blessing for BRICS Plus at this point. But it raises the question, of course, that if Argentina does not join going forward, and if 5 of them go forward, then the American continental presence of BRICS is diminished. It then becomes much more of a Eurasian creature, with only Brazil and South Africa being its non-Eurasian members. And I don't think that is the aim of its founding fathers, who would like for this to become much more inclusive of an international organization. Remember, when the call for membership went out, 40 countries expressed an interest to join the BRICS. So it's not like the permanent 5, if you like, don't have options, but it's all about the messaging that is sent out. Frankly, if you're looking at the Americas, I would have thought that Brazil and Mexico would be the ideal candidates, or Brazil and Venezuela. Venezuela geopolitically is much more comfortable with the BRICS, for example, than Argentina might have been. Why weren't they invited to join? Well, because Mexico has this tied-in relations with the United States that it cannot disentangle. Yeah. And Venezuela is much more of a problem for the BRICS to manage than Argentina would have been before the recent election result in terms of its expansion. Why? Because Brazil has issues with Venezuela. So geopolitics continues to underpin the decision-making process of the permanent members of the BRICS.
You just spoke about de-dollarization. Now, President Raisi has expressed support for BRICS' efforts towards de-dollarization of economic relations. As an Iranian expert, how do you view the significance of moving away from the US dollar in international transactions, and what benefits does it anticipate from this shift?
For Iran itself, it will mean that it will free its hands up considerably. Iran already, for example, does quite a bit of its trade with Russia in rubles. Nobody else takes Russia's rubles. So it creates this opening for Russia, but also enables Iran not to use the US dollar for its trade. It's really significant in that regard. The problem, though, is where is the benchmark valuation for these currencies, right? For instance, the yuan is not a convertible currency. The ruble is not a convertible currency. What that means is that as Iran accumulates rubles and yuans, it cannot exchange them for other currencies. It can only deal with China and with Russia. And so you can build up all of those currencies, but it at the same time ultimately restricts your trading partners. So in a sense, you could argue that Iran is going from the pan into the pot, because it will not be able to trade those accumulated currencies with other countries. So it'll have to buy more Russian goods, it'll have to buy more Chinese goods, and those countries will then determine the terms of preference for those trades, not Iran, because Iran is a much smaller economy compared to those two. So, in theory, de-dollarization makes sense. But then Iran also wants to see a basket of currencies to emerge within the BRICS. And that is extremely difficult because the Emiratis and Saudis benchmark their currencies with the dollar. Sure, they have a basket of currencies that includes rupees, that includes yuan, as well as euros, and so on. But the dollar remains central. So it's about the convertibility of the currencies that you use that makes, and that's why the dollar is like liquid gold in international trade, because it is fully convertible as a currency. And that is why the euro has tried, but has not succeeded in replacing the dollar. So in a sense, for Iran, it is a way forward, but it has a very clear ceiling. And Iran cannot go beyond that ceiling so long as it remains under sanctions.
So, considering Iran's global economic aspirations, do you see BRICS as a potential challenger to the economic hegemony traditionally held by the G7 nations? And what role could Iran play in such a scenario?
I think Iran would be very keen to lead the world towards multipolarity. It's been the mantra for 40 plus years. Remember, when Ayatollah Khomeini first came to power, his foreign policy badge was neither East nor West. What did that say? A third way. If you like, multipolarity 101. You could argue that it's taken 40 odd years for the world to catch up with Iran's aspirations. And in a sense, it is countries like China, like India, like Russia, like South Africa, like Brazil, which are championing this new wave of internationalization of the international system. And they do so because they see tremendous movement in the global south. And this enchantment of the global south with the domination of the G7 is now manifesting itself in the way that the BRICS have emerged. As I said at the outset, the BRICS have got many flaws. The BRICS system is vulnerable. There is little cohesion within the BRICS when you compare it to the G7, but it is symbolically significant because it offers an alternative. And in the South Africa summit of the G7, it was very clear when the UN General Secretary spoke, Guterres spoke at the summit. He talked about the world moving on from the G7. That's, if you like, politically significant statement coming from the head of the UN, saying that the World Bank, the IMF, the Security Council, the structures of the UN all need to evolve and change and respond to this emerging global order, right? Well, that is something that both China and India, in very different ways, champion. Not so much the other ones, but India and China in particular. So Iran's aspirations very much chimes with those aspirations of these new emerging global powers. How far they can push this? Well, one thing that we don't talk about in the context of the BRICS Plus is G20. Remember, we now have this soup of international organizations, the G7, the BRICS, BRICS Plus, G20, and so on. G20 actually, Sukanya, is a really important organization that interestingly excludes Iran, but includes some of the new members of the BRICS Plus, Saudi Arabia in particular. Turkey, for example. Where is Turkey in regard to BRICS Plus, right? So in that context, therefore, Iran's ability to change things are limited by the power of the others, like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, for example, right? So it can try and flex its muscles. It can try and bring these new agendas to the fore, but its ability to unilaterally change or push forward the BRICS Plus program remains limited, in my view.
So, given the historical ties between Iran and India, how might Iran's entry into BRICS influence its diplomatic relations with India, and what collaborative opportunities could emerge in areas beyond economics?
I think India and Iran are, in many ways, bedfellows. They have long history together. They have been together. They understand their their cultural nuances. When in India, you talk about the Parsis, there is a direct link to Iran. When you talk about the Mughals, there's a direct link between Iran and India. And also, when they both look northwards and across the borders at each other, they share that long history of Central Asia together. They share the long history of engagement, of literature, of cuisine, of cultural values, and so on. So in a sense, they have much in common that is only now beginning to manifest itself in new ways. And in that regard, I think Iran's membership of the BRICS will open new avenues for conversation between New Delhi and Tehran in ways that they probably didn't. Because the only other forum in which Iran and India met formally was the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But SCO is a security organization. It is not an inclusive socioeconomic organization. BRICS Plus is, right? So in that context, it enables Iran and India to have much more of a direct dialogue and conversation about what is in the mutual interest in ways that they never did, or in ways that Iran had to be worried about what China might think, or India worried about what the Americans might think. They don't have to worry about those things anymore. In Chabahar, southern Iran, as you know, India has a particular interest in terms of access to Central Asia and Afghanistan. Iran provides India that access in ways that Pakistan denies India that access. The two of them have interests in the Indian Ocean, in the security of the Indian Ocean, in trade routes, and so on. India has strong interest in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, and so on, cultural as well as economic interests there. Iran is a neighbor of these countries. And so the two have that in common, as well as, of course, Iran's energy resources and what India needs for its continuing development. But also, last but not least, when you look at how China has managed to place itself within the Persian Gulf, I think New Delhi needs also to look at that and see whether it also needs to develop much more, for want of a better word, concrete ways of engaging with these countries. The Belt and Road Initiative is China's diplomatic way, economic way into West Asia. In many ways, India needs to follow suit, whether it is the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, but unfortunately now, the IIW, India, Israel, Arab Emirates, United States corridor is blocked because of the Gaza war. But nevertheless, India needs to look at West Asia as a destination as well as a pathway for the broadening of its own international profile. The BRICS Plus may well offer India that opportunity.
So, Anush, given the historical regional differences, how likely is it that Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and the UAE can collaborate effectively within BRICS?
Yeah, that is also a fantastic question, because numerically, what the so-called Middle East countries now make up nearly half of the BRICS Plus, and there are now 3 Arab countries in there. It's granted there is 3 African countries: South Africa, Ethiopia, and Egypt. But again, it's interesting that Algeria is not included in this, for example, which geopolitically would have fitted much more neatly in a BRICS kind of agenda. And also, of course, it's a major energy supplier as well. But it's Egypt, and Egypt is another Arab country. And these 3 Arab countries, Egypt, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, have played a profound role in shaping the whole Arab geopolitics. So what they bring to this BRICS party is going to be really important. First, and also, while they are largely like-minded, of the 3, Saudi Arabia remains the dominant of the 3. It has the largest land surface territory. It has the largest economy. It is much better network globally, nearly as Emirates is nearly at that level. But Saudi Arabia is the giant of the Persian Gulf, if you like, of the Arab countries. And also it has influence right across the planet in ways that Egypt doesn't, for example. So it's true that Egypt is large, the largest Arab country, but it's not true that it has as much influence as Saudi Arabia. So what Saudi Arabia does is important because the UAE and Egypt have to watch Saudi Arabia's line within the BRICS plus, right? First. Secondly, Iran has had issues with all three of them. Thanks to Beijing, the tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia are now being addressed. In March, it'll be a year since the Chinese brokered this new rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But it doesn't mean that the problems have gone away. Over Yemen, over Iraq, over Lebanon, over Palestine, over security of the waterway, over religion, over relations with India, over relations with China. They have issues. Those issues need to be resolved, if not at least ironed out. Iran has a territorial dispute with the UAE, right? They don't even agree on the name of the waterway that they share. So, there are profound differences between them. Iran and Egypt do not have diplomatic relations. While they talk about it, they still haven't restored diplomatic relations between the two countries. So putting them into the BRICS basket creates unforeseen tensions and crises that I think the permanent members are not yet ready to address, right? Because their agendas are also different from each other, and their interests are also different from each other. So that remains an open question. That said, though, the fact that there are now 3 Arab countries in the BRICS plus sends a very clear signal to those Arab countries' Western allies that they have to be very careful about how they deal with these countries. They cannot assume them as passive powers, that they all have agency, they all have options, and that they're not beholden to Western largesse, that they actually can exercise independence of action, and by being invited to join the BRICS and by accepting it, they're exercising that latitude in their foreign relations. There may be economic benefits down the line, let's see, but for the moment, the gesture is much more diplomatic and political than economic, in my view.
So, given the diverging interests of BRICS members, especially between India and China, what challenges do you foresee in maintaining unity within the group? And how can these challenges be effectively addressed? Also, there's this little debate about India. Some experts feel India is the leader of the global south now, but China also wants to be the leader of the global south. After the BRICS expansion happens next year, who do you think will emerge as the new leader of the global south?
Yeah, that's such a tough question to address. I think it is in both countries' interest to see BRICS expand, partly because it dilutes the tension between China and India. And also it broadens the base of the BRICS in ways that allows both of them to bring different kinds of comparative advantage to it. India's position as the favored Asian country by the West, in addition to Japan and South Korea, is really important. Because unlike Japan and South Korea, India has huge geographic, demographic, emerging economic weight, right? It sits pivotally at the crossroads of oceans that facilitates trade, maritime trade across Eurasia. It's a profoundly important country. Also, its cultural influence reaches all the way to the southern tip of the African continent. So all the way into Southeast Asia. So, and all the way up into Central Asia, the borders of Russia and China. So it cannot be underestimated or contained in that sense, right? So for both India and China, this is a huge challenge because not only they have a border dispute that is sapping their energies and preventing them to develop a joint agenda for security of Asia, where they both are dominant powers now, but also there are complications in relation to where China sits globally and where India sits globally. In some ways, India's polarity is hampering its ability to compete with China, right? China's doggedness in terms of driving a single agenda is something that India cannot replicate. You know, India is genuinely a multi a multicultural, multi-economic, multi-political pot, which is dynamic because of that. You know, it's full of energy, it's full of enthusiasm and ideas. And what it's trying to do is transfer those into a foreign policy. And it hasn't yet managed to do this successfully. Why? Because at the heart of India's worldview is third worldism that goes back to the days of Congress I, and the way in which it was skeptical of Western influence, having been colonized. You understand why that should be the case. But also remember, India has been a champion of the non-ally movement, of anything that brings independence, flexibility to the international system. And also, as its power grows internationally, it looks at Russia and China and it asks itself, why are these two permanent members of the Security Council and I'm not? After all, India's economy is now larger than Russia's. If it is nuclear weapons, where India has got them, thank you very much. If it is about military power, India has it, thank you very much. If it is about demography, India has it in barrel loads, thank you very much. So why should it not be a permanent member of the Security Council, right? The irony is that in that, it will find obstacle probably in China and Russia and not in the United States. So these are structural problems that the BRICS face. And I don't see myself, the BRICS being able to address these while they're looking at expanding themselves and trying to create this multipolar world order. That multipolar world order doesn't mean that it needs to have complete cohesion between India, Russia, and China. What it means is a common interest. And maybe within SCO and BRICS Plus, they can begin to put aside the differences for a greater common good. But I think we're still a long way from that.
So, this question is one of my favorites. Pakistan has applied for BRICS membership now this year, despite India roadblock. Do you think it will get the membership? Also, what does that mean for New Delhi?
I think it's going to be a real challenge for both Beijing and New Delhi to manage that one. Actually, I mentioned Argentina to be a hot potato. This one is a handful of hot potatoes, really, for both of them. If Beijing, you know, your audience, we all know the closeness of relations between China and Pakistan, and also this the China Pakistan economic corridor has really joined the two much more closely together, right across Asia, bypassing the subcontinent to India's backyard in the Indian Ocean. Gwadar, in many ways, represents China going around India and getting access to western side of the subcontinent in ways that it just didn't have access to. China knows that's of great concern to India, but also China being a nuclear weapon state, India being a nuclear weapon state, and Pakistan being a nuclear weapon state, that raises questions about what kind of a BRICS are we creating? Is this now increasingly a pseudo-military organization, or is it still an economic organization? Because, you know, having 4 Asian nuclear weapon states at the heart of BRICS is quite a statement to have. So this is not even considering the bilateral tensions over Kashmir and such like between India and Pakistan. So it is a minefield that both China and India have to manage. But the problem for Beijing is that it has never said no to Pakistan. Yeah. And it is really difficult for China to publicly reject Islamabad's application for membership, while while not putting India's nose out of joint, because it is not something that New Delhi is going to take favorably or lightly in that context. And that would create major tensions at the heart of BRICS Plus. Also, of course, unlike the new members, the 6 or 5, let's put Argentina aside for the moment, the 5 who will join in January 2024, Pakistan remains a hugely fragile polity and economy. Ethiopia is a member of BRICS Plus because it is the host of the African Union. Right. And because it is one of Africa's fastest growing economies. Correct. And it's because China has close economic relations with Ethiopia, right? And also because Ethiopia doesn't pose a security geopolitical challenge to anybody else, right? Pakistan doesn't fit that bill. Pakistan's economy is weak. Its geopolitics is unstable. It doesn't bring added value to the BRICS expansion of their economic bases. And given its role in Afghanistan, if you like, the ethnic religious tensions within Pakistan, it generates a whole new range of problems for the other members of the BRICS that they don't have to face. South Africa, Brazil, and so on. Russia even doesn't have to worry about this stuff, right? On the other hand, however, given that Pakistan is a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, sits at the table with India and China, you could argue that if they can digest Pakistan in the SCO, why can't India and China digest Pakistan in BRICS Plus? Okay. I would argue maybe yes, but there is a huge difference between the SCO and the BRICS Plus. The SCO is a counter-terrorism organization ultimately. And for that reason, it's important to have Pakistan in it, given its history and also its links with Afghanistan and such like, right? Yeah. In the BRICS, it will not serve that same purpose. In the BRICS, it will challenge certainly India's dominant role, right? Yeah. And it will certainly cause tensions between India and China in terms of how to manage Pakistan, which raises questions about Russia's involvement and Iran's involvement. Right. And thirdly, ironically, Pakistan's closest allies are UAE and Saudi Arabia in West Asia, right? So if Pakistan is then absorbed in the BRICS Plus, how will that change the geopolitical dynamics of the BRICS when it can turn to Saudi Arabia and Emirates for support? And how will that affect then their relations with India in particular, with which they both have close ties? So when I said it is a sack full of hot potatoes, this is what I meant.
So in relation to the Israel-Hamas conflict, some experts have suggested that Iran may have played a significant role in, exacerbating the crisis. What is your perspective on this claim? Also, with Iran joining the BRICS grouping, do you think it will gain a strategic advantage in the ongoing conflict with Israel?
Right. The Gaza war is not something that Iran wanted. Yeah. Or is directly supporting, and or indeed wants to be involved with. And they've made this clear from the top down that they give it kind of lip service. Certainly, they have used the Houthis and Hasha-Shabi in Iraq to pressure the West in particular, to pressure Israel as well in terms of the sea lanes. They have used Hezbollah in Lebanon to pressure Israel, but these are all indirect actions, if you like, and they can kind of step back and let Hezbollah and the Houthis wreak havoc with international shipping and such like, or with Israel's border communities in the Levant, but they do not want to be involved directly. Within the BRICS, of course, Egypt and Israel have got diplomatic relations. UAE and Israel have got diplomatic relations. Saudi Arabia and Israel have been in dialogue about closer relations. None of them want Iran interfere in their relations or in their evolving dialogues with Israel. First. Secondly, for all of Iran's involvements with Hamas, Palestine remains primarily an Arab Muslim issue, not just a Muslim issue, not just the Muslim Global South issue. And the Arab countries take real exception to Iran championing the Palestinian cause at their expense. They can't come out against Hamas because of what Israel is doing in Gaza now. But in the past, they've made it very clear that they see this as Iranian interference in Arab affairs. So within the BRICS, they're unlikely to accept Iran pushing an agenda which is not in the interest of Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, or the wider Arab world in that context. And also, of course, there are bigger issues in relation to how China and India approach the Gaza war. They are diametrically opposed in where they stand on the conflict. So I can't see Iran being able to develop any strategy as a BRICS plus strategy, given these divergent positions and diametrically opposed views on the conflict as we go forward.
That's it, Anoush. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you guys for watching our show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
For such fine news breaks and video features from ground on your mobile phones, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, The New Indian, by clicking on the bell icon. Also, follow us on the social media handles on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Co.